Well, everybody, delighted to have you all join us today for this session. My name's Sharon Smith and I'm CW's Member Support Officer. Today we're discussing and learning about deer management in community woodlands, primarily because deer management is a subject of conversation that comes up in lots of our discussions with our members. To share their knowledge and expertise, we've invited along today three members who are keen to share with you what they know and the experience and knowledge that they have. We've got Jenny Greaves from Scottish Forestry, whose role is to provide training and increase knowledge and understanding within the forestry profession. Jenny's based in the south of Scotland and her expertise lies in lowland deer management. We're also joined by Rob Coope today. Rob is one of the deer managers for Highland Perthshire Communities Land Trust, which manages some community-owned land called Duncoylich, which hugs the eastern shoulder of Schiehallion. And Rob will share with us how he manages deer in native woodland, on public land and on various land scales. And finally, we're joined by Jim Brown, who's the deer manager for the Knoydart Foundation on the wonderful Knoydart Peninsula. And Jim will share a little bit about the uniqueness of managing deer on Knoydart, how they pay for deer management, how they involve the community in land management planning, and how they make an income from venison. It's certainly shaping up to be a very interesting webinar. Each speaker will speak for 20 minutes and then we will finish with a Q&A at the end. Questions in the chat and we'll do our very best to answer them all at the end. Or if there's anything specifically pertinent that comes up to, at any time, then please just add into the chat and I'll do my best to interject when we can. But before we go straight into hearing from Jenny to start off with, please indulge me for a minute whilst I share with you some information about CWA. So Community Woodlands Association helps communities connect to their woodland. We currently have 177 members, most of whom are community groups owning or managing woodland in Scotland. There are many benefits to being a Community Woodland Association member, and they are that we advocate in the political arena on behalf of our members, responding to consultations, etc. when they are required. We provide support and advice to communities who are looking perhaps to start up a community woodland group or who already have a woodland and are looking for ongoing support. We provide connection and we help join the dots. It's a huge part of our role, which we achieve through listening to our members' needs and then supporting with training sessions like today's, exchange visits, mentoring programs, and we also have our annual conference, which we'd recently had in Stirling just last month. We provide professional support through our team members. So we have Pierce Voicey and our newly appointed Woodland Officer, Alec Brawley, who are able to provide paid advice and consultancy to any member groups. And we work in partnership with strategic partners across Scotland to make it easier for our communities to be actively involved in woodland management. So if you're not already a member, you can quickly grab a wee screenshot of the QR code, or I will put the link to join us in the chat as we begin. But Jenny, when you're ready, if you want to take control of the screen, and we welcome you here today.
Super, thanks Sharon. Right, if I'll just try this, hopefully it'll work. Yeah, there we go. Is that working? Right, great. Super. Well, thanks for having me. As Sharon said, I'm Jenny. I work for Scottish Forestry. I have a kind of keen interest in deer and deer management, especially kind of lowland deer, so particularly roe and sika. I don't do it professionally. I'm a recreational stalker, so I kind of do it as a hobby. And I haven't included this in my presentation, but I'd be interested to talk to anyone who's kind of interested in getting into stalking, because I found it a bit of a struggle to begin with. If you're kind of not from that background, it can be quite difficult to get into it. So I think particularly from a kind of community wood context, it can be a bit daunting. So I'm happy to chat with anyone afterwards if they're interested in getting into it but don't quite know how to. There's so much to say on deer and deer management. It's one of those subjects that you kind of get into it a bit and then you realise how much more there is to sort of learn and understand. So I'll try and stick to my 20 minutes. And I think the idea is questions at the end. Okay, so deer in community woodlands. So if you're a community woodland, I suppose the first thing you need to think about is what are your objectives for the woodland management? What are your objectives of the wood? Why has the community purchased it or leased it? There could be a number of reasons. So it could be kind of recreation. So in terms of sort of deer and recreation, people like to see deer. I know of community woodlands that have their own Facebook page just for the deer that live in their wood. So it can be a really important aspect of the wood and connecting with people to have deer in the wood. People like dog walking. It's usually not a problem. The dogs can slightly scare the deer sometimes. And there may be a sort of slight deer welfare issue, but it's not normally too much. So generally, deer are kind of a positive in terms of kind of recreation in community woodlands. If you have your woodland primarily for kind of ecology and biodiversity, then obviously it's more than likely that you're going to have to start managing the deer. I think there's going to be more detail on this later, but deer are part of woodland ecology. And I'll talk a bit later about kind of population cycles, but it's more than likely that deer, because the numbers are so high, are causing some damage to your woodland. Another objective might be income. It could be income from the timber, or it could be income even from deer stalking. And I'll again briefly talk about opportunities for getting income in a kind of lowland context later. Landscape, you might want to kind of get some species diversity or move to a kind of continuous cover system to improve the kind of look of the forest, improve the landscape. And so deer have an important role in that. There are some species such as Sitka that are not as palatable, which is why you often get them planted in some areas. So deer are kind of key to achieving the objective of moving over to a different type of forestry. As I said before, community engagement. Deer are an absolutely brilliant way of engaging with the wider community. They can help with monitoring. They can you can help get to know the deer within your woodland, especially with kind of roe and a little bit with sika, but mainly with roe. They're very kind of territorial. So you almost have kind of a sort of deer that live within your woodland that your community can get to know. If you know the stories of Bambi, Disney kind of made Bambi into a red deer, but the original book of Bambi is actually about a kind of roe deer family. So it's just a great way of getting kind of families and people nearby interested in your woodland is by using the deer that are there. And of course, it's could be a mixture. Your objectives could be a mixture of the above. Next slide. Now you probably all know this, so I won't take long on it. But so why are deer managed? Well, primarily deer browse on trees, preventing them from growing, and they can damage habitats by browsing on herbaceous species and other plants. There's almost no natural predators left. I've said almost because foxes will predate on young roe kids, but that's pretty much it. And so we almost have to be the kind of apex predator, sort of managing their numbers. They're managed for income, they're managed for sport, and they're managed for things like deer vehicle collisions. That's a kind of issue that's becoming more and more important, and also deer welfare issues as well. So you have your community woodland. Perhaps you're new to the committee, or perhaps your community has just bought it or leased it, and you need to have a think to how to tell if you need to manage the deer in your community woodland. Well, again, it goes back to the objectives that we talked about. So that I talked about. So you'll need to manage the deer if you're planting or restocking, and you need to protect the young trees. You need to manage the deer if you're trying to encourage natural regen, because again, you'd need to protect the young trees. As I said before, if you want to improve the structure of the woodland or move to continuous cover or improve diversity of the species, or just to improve the condition of the wood in general. I would say that, you know, if you are new to the committee, or if you are a community woodland that has just kind of purchased or leased your woodland, then don't just continue doing what has been done before, like what the previous owner has done. You know, take some time, have a good think about it, and use community members rather than just sort of being slightly bamboozled by you know, what's been done before and just kind of going along with what's happened before. You know, there's plenty of time to kind of really investigate and think about things. So the next slide. So you know you need to manage your deer, and you need to get more information about what deer are there, what numbers, what impacts they're having. There's a variety of different deer monitoring methodologies. There's the ones that are looking at impacts. So they're things like nearest neighbour, which is generally used on kind of commercial crops, but can be used in a variety of other situations. Things like bark stripping and herbivore impact assessments, which are going to, I'm not going to talk about now because they're going to be talked about in more detail later. So that's looking at the impacts. And then there's other methodologies, which is trying to work out how many deer are actually in your wood. So that's things like dung counts, using camera traps, direct observation, or it could be drones, which, you know, they all have different costs. They all take different time. For some of them, you know, you can involve community members. Some of them it's trickier. Things like dung counting is generally for kind of much bigger sort of commercial woodlands. It's, if you've ever done it, it's quite tricky to do. So there's a variety of ways, and you need to have a good think about what's the best way of kind of working out what deer are there. And then from that, you need to then write your deer management plan. There are a variety of templates, and these might be talked about later, but essentially you're just wanting to know what deer are there and how you're going to manage them to meet your objectives. And then you're writing that down. So you've kind of got a clear plan of what you need to do. And so once you know you need to manage your deer, how are you going to manage them? So there is a variety of methods. You can use plastic tree tubes. Obviously, a lot of people don't like to use the plastic. You can fence using deer fencing. You can cull them using stalkers. And there's other options as well. So there's things like trico, which is a kind of deer repellent that you put on individual trees, which I guess is better for kind of slightly smaller areas. And so now I'm just going to go on to just kind of talking about roe deer. So roe deer, they are everywhere in Scotland. You can see in the map, that's where you find roe deer. Well, not everywhere, actually, not the islands, but some of the islands, but mostly everywhere. And they are a native species. Their preferred habitat is kind of mixed woodland with a variety of open glades, agricultural land, and hedgerows. They feed, they're concentrate selectors, so they kind of not browsers. They kind of have specific they're kind of specialist feeders. So if you watch them carefully, you'll kind of see them kind of nosing about in the grass or nosing about, and then they'll just pick specific plants or specific parts of plants that they want to eat. And so they go for the very kind of highly nutritious things, plants like the herbs and some of the grasses. And because of that, they can survive within fairly kind of small territories. And roe deer, they're very different from sort of red deer. So they do have, let's move to that slide. I'm just going to move on to this and skip back. They do have home ranges and territories. So you'll get a doe and she'll have her home range that she defends. And then you'll get the bucks and they'll have their home range they defend. And they'll overlap, but they'll be very sort of, you know, the bucks will just sort of have their territory and defend against other bucks. And the does will do the same against other does. So I've just produced this map just to kind of give you an idea. So when you're kind of looking at your community woodland, there'll be like resident does and probably a resident buck somewhere. And I think it's really important to kind of, if you've just got roe deers, to kind of get to know what's there. You know, if you go out with a good stalker, he'll know, or she'll know exactly, you know, where the does are. They'll know the bucks, they'll know their routine, they know where they go in the morning, they'll know how they mark their territory. So you can really familiarize yourself with what deer are kind of living there. And the kind of home range and territory is really dependent on what habitats are there. So if it's a kind of really poor habitat, and when I mean poor, there's not much kind of browsing available. So something like a kind of mature conifer woodland, you know, just a kind of Sitka spruce plantation, not much else, just the odd ride. Then the deer that are resident that live there will need a much bigger area on which to kind of get their sustenance. And so, you know, I've just put on this map here that big commercial woodland, you could have one deer needing, you know, over 30 hectares to survive. Whereas if it's a kind of, if it's a really good habitat, so something, you know, like a nice mixed woodland, variety of ages, glades, a bit of agricultural land, hedgerows, then they need a much smaller area to survive. And there's, you know, records of some roe deer, you know, just surviving in sort of 3 hectares because it's got everything they need within that area. They don't just go wandering about for no reason. If their area's got everything they need, then they won't go anywhere else. So I think that's, oh, sorry, I'm going to go back to that one. So this table gives quite a good idea of, you know, the type of number of hectares that a kind of deer can survive on. It just kind of shows that conifer is their least favorite habitat. They can't get much sustenance from a kind of mature conifer plantation, so they'll need a much bigger area. So it's just quite a good way that if you're looking at what your woodland, you know, is, then you can kind of, I mean, it's very rough, but you can get a rough idea of how many roe deer are kind of going to be in the area. It's important to remember, though, that forests and woodlands, you know, they're always in a state of change. So, you know, the trees, obviously, they age, they fall down, you get regeneration, that kind of thing. So this kind of holding carrying capacity of your woodland will change over time, depending on what's available. And I thought it was quite interesting just to put this table. I couldn't find one last night on with kind of deer, but it's the same kind of thing. So as with any kind of predator-prey relationship, you kind of get these cycles, and so naturally there would be, you know, a cycle of deer where you know there would be high numbers, and then the numbers would fall, and then there would be high numbers again, and that is almost a way for the woodland to recover. So when the numbers naturally would have crashed, then that's when you get a lot of kind of the regen managing to escape. And it's interesting because I've got a very small piece of land, and there was no deer protection, and there was some oak regen, and every year they're just getting hammered and hammered and hammered. They're still alive, but they're just, every winter they're just getting nibbled down to almost nothing. And so I put a fence around it a couple of years ago, and it's just incredible how these little oak trees have just kind of shot up. And it's, you know, they're just kind of, it's almost like biding their time until the deer numbers, until they stop being browsed. And then they just kind of go for it. And it's within 2 years, they're now out of reach of roe deer because they've just grown so quickly. So it's worth just, you know, when you're thinking about kind of deer management in your community wood, you know, it doesn't have, you're not having to go out and shoot these numbers every year. You can kind of almost do it in a kind of cyclical way where you just have a few heavy years to let the woodland recover a bit, and then you step back a bit, and then you go back in again. Yep, what's that? And Sika deer, they are a non-native species who have, I think, come from sort of the Far East. They are spreading. I know it's one of Nature Scott's kind of priorities is to kind of stop the spread of Sika deer. there's a kind of where I'm down in Peebles, you can see there's quite a high population down there. Their preferred habitat is coniferous woodland and heaths with a mix of open areas with grasses and herbaceous plants and shrubs. Now they have a kind of slightly different sort of way of living. So they tend to live in sort of small, stable, matriarchal groups. And the males can generally quite solitary, or they might sort of form small bachelor groups. And then what will happen, a male will go out looking for kind of new habitats or a new territory. And then when they find one, they'll come back and get some females and kind of take them to the new territory. Sika can cause quite a lot of damage for sort of bowl scoring, and from what the stalkers that I speak to say, they can be very difficult to manage because they're very good at kind of hiding and hunkering down in coniferous woodland. But saying that, they're also quite desired because you can get quite good money for stalking Sika. And so if you've got your community woodland, in terms of options for sort of managing them, you can pay someone to come in and do it. I know that there's some charities down here in South Scotland that they now do that because they just need to get on top of deer numbers to get the regeneration. So they're actually just paying a day rate for people to come in. And often, the stalker is just sat there and doesn't shoot anything. But that's what they need to do to get the deer numbers down to the levels that they require. So you can do a kind of lease stalking arrangement. So an individual will pay you to have the permission on their land. And it could be that they are just doing it themselves, or it could be that they are then charging other people to go out with them to stalk the deer. So obviously it's in their interest that there are deer there when they're taking out clients. Another arrangement is like a syndicate where you get a group of people. Generally they're just doing it themselves. They might occasionally take people out. You can have a cost neutral permission, which is basically you're not paying them and they're not paying you, and they will probably get an income from selling the carcasses. I've got one experience of that, and it seems to work incredibly well because the guy is shooting so much because that's how he gets his money. Community stalking, which I think the guys will talk about later. And another option is allowing neighbouring stalkers onto your property. I know FLS do this quite a bit. Well, if there's a joining woodland that aren't really getting on top of their deer management, then they will perhaps come into an arrangement where the FLS stalkers can go onto their land. That one. And I just thought it might be useful just to give you some idea of some rates. Now, this is just what I know down here. So for recreational stalking, when I said earlier about paying a guy's got a lease and then he's charging clients to come out, he'll probably sort of charge in the region of about £100 a day, with an extra sort of £30 or £50 if you shoot a doe, and similar for a buck, but a bit, so £100 a day and then perhaps an extra £75 or £100 to shoot a buck. But that's quite a bit different to the Sika. So for a stag, they could charge about 350 and hind about 175. So if you're thinking about, if you've got your community woodland, just for 3 Sika stags, you could get over £1,000. So it's worth thinking about it. And it's also worth, if there is an arrangement in place, it's worth thinking about who's making the money here, and could it be us as the community woodland that are making this money? And usually, just to give you an idea of rates, I mean, it depends it completely depends on what the type of land is, but it can really vary from about £1 an acre up to even £5. And I know down in the south of England, in a really high quality, it can be about £10 for a really good site. So that's what a lease, you'd be getting paid by a recreational stalker if you owned the land. And I think that's it for now. So hopefully that was useful, and yeah, questions at the end if you've got any.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Over to Rob.
If you do have any questions for Jenny, please put them in the chat just now and I'll collate them for the end. I've certainly got a couple I've written down here for you, Jenny. So if no one else pops up, then I've got some for you. Rob, if you want to take control of the slides. And Jenny, thanks very much for that. Robin, you come.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah.
You can indeed. Good.
Right. Thank you, Jenny. That was really useful, interesting, and enjoyable. My name's Rob Coope. I've been involved with deer all my life, really, but I've been a stalker for 50 years. 16 of those years were full-time woodland stalking. Huge culls in those days as well. So a lot of experience of deer, but also kind of sharp-end experience as well in some ways. But my interest has always been deer and their part in nature and ecology as well. So I got very involved in native woodland, management of deer in native woodland, latterly mostly in the Highlands, particularly in Perthshire, and then got involved with Highland Perthshire Communities Land Trust, who bought a deer farm, which sounds a bit odd, but they bought the deer farm with an objective of restoring native woodland on a site which had been completely flattened, really. So what I'll try and focus on here is my deer management experience on a community woodland. Okay. I'm not sure. Yeah, right. I just pinched this off the internet. This stag obviously saying it wasn't me. I don't eat trees. But maybe we've kind of touched on it a lot already. But the main issue, certainly in the Highlands, is deer eat trees. We need more trees, or we want more trees as a nation, and so we need to have fewer deer. But even more specifically on community-owned land in the Highland Perthshire context, the community who bought the land recognised that they could see deer anywhere. Anywhere they went, there were deer. But they were very happy to experience deer and enjoy having them as neighbours and companions, but they weren't particularly happy to have them on this ex-deer farm. So in theory, all of the deer were removed. And when I came along, my job was to try and understand a little bit more about the deer that might have still been remaining. Were there any deer, working within the objectives of trying to manage this piece of heavily browsed land for woodland regeneration. And it struck me that we had teams who went out. It was a great community event. We wandered around the hill. It's about 1,000 acres. And we wandered around this hill deer farm, counting the deer that we saw, and everybody got a different number. Some people would see 16 in a day, some people would see none. So we actually had no idea how many deer there were. And it struck me that the thing we should really focus on was their impact that they were having on that land. And it's fairly obvious to say, in an ex-deer farm, their impact had been pretty major. But it started the whole interest in herbivore impact assessments. And herbivore impact assessments have moved on enormously over the last few years. I won't go into detail too much, because if you go into the NatureScot site and look at the deer best practice guidance, there is really good guidance for woodland deer management, or there's good deer management advice, but there's really good herbivore impact assessment advice for woodland in particular, especially native woodland. In a regenerating native woodland context, we're really looking for young trees to survive and grow, rather than looking at a commercial damage that might be caused. We heard about bole scoring by seeker, for instance, and that really does damage the most valuable part of the tree, but it's not really so damaging to a native woodland, where what we're really concerned with is browsing. And just for context, this little oak seedling is being browsed in the summertime. all the herbivore impact assessment work we try and do is normally based on winter assessments because they're much more consistent and they tend to have a much bigger impact. So on this little seedling, you can see green stalks at the top that have been nice and neatly nibbled off. That is fairly typical behavior of roe deer. Roe deer are that they are specifically browsing the most nutritious part of young trees and very, very selective browsers. So although this might not be part of a standard herbivore impact assessment, it straight away would tell me that there's something going on in the forest. Obviously, we've got a young seedling that's being nibbled, probably by roe deer, but it isn't killed in any way. You can see most of the buds are still viable. If that tree is given a break, it will grow. So look at the guidance for herbivore impact assessments. They're really now becoming quite easy, even fun to do. They tell us a lot about, they tell us more about objective related deer management if we're looking for the establishment of young trees. They tell us more than the straight number of deer. This rather unhealthy looking pine tree was on Duncoilich. They wanted to have natural regen, and because it was so heavily grazed and browsed, they also chose, the board chose to plant trees. And so one or two of the early members were quite startled when a big machine came in and started making mounds everywhere, little, what we always refer to as dollops, but you know, mounds for trees to be planted in. It was a bit of a community shock and did involve quite a lot of close conversation. But the relevant thing here is that even when we planted the trees, many of them struggled in their early days. And a lot of this, it's a shame in a way I've cropped the picture too small. But this struggling pine tree, Scots pine, is not a result of deer damage. It's a result probably of numerous factors, mainly planting issues, probably soil condition, lack of mycorrhiza in the soil, but also sitting on top of the dollop was a great cluster of black grouse droppings. And on Duncoilich, we were really lucky to have a very spectacular lek, over 50 male black grouse letting in the spring, a species which have gone into national and international decline, but in Highland Perthshire we're doing really well. And they were incredibly visible, great for public, interaction with a rare and spectacular species. But they do like to nibble on pine buds. So sometimes we need to be very clear about who we're blaming for the damage, how seriously we take that damage. Was that little oak tree going to survive? If all the little oak trees got nibbled, is that too much? And it's that kind of assessment that we need to make, rather than saying we've got too many deer. We need to say that the impact is too great. In this particular case, we were almost unanimous in Duncoilich being quite keen on the black grouse, quite interested and keen on the deer, but aware that the amount of damage, shall we say, being caused by the grouse was far, far less than that caused by the deer. So in this particular case, we were quite relaxed really about a little bit of black grouse damage. A different part of Highland Perthshire, but very close to Duncoilich, and this is very typical of many woodland restoration projects. We protect a piece of ground, put a fence to protect it from deer, and quite quickly, this is about 12, 15 years after the fence was put up, you see a massive growth inside the fence on the left-hand side, compared to what is considered by many as the normal hill on the right-hand side of the picture. And the reason I show this, because I'm sure we've all seen this sort of thing in the Highlands anyway, we've seen this sort of thing. The reason I mention this is largely because how we manage deer in a woodland restoration context depends an awful lot on scale. So these blocks that have been protected from deer to try and grow trees are in Glen Lyon. And in Glen Lyon, the objective is to have a large sporting resource, but also to recognise the importance of the Caledonian pine forest. So they wanted to try and have both. It's quite a legitimate thing to do, to try and have both deer and recovering native woodland. But the scale at which you work is really quite small in terms of the woodland. So if you fence off 20 hectares, it's not really enough ground in the Highlands to support a population of deer. So you're not actually talking about maintaining a population within that 20 hectares. You're talking about trying to remove deer. And what we end up with is a regeneration situation where there are no deer at all. In terms of ecology and natural progression, whatever, we all have slightly different interpretation of what nature is, but if in terms of natural progression, having no deer in a forest context in Scotland is really quite startling. And you can see just how thick the growth of those trees is. It's rather spectacular, but it's hardly it. What we've done is preserved a lot of trees, but we haven't preserved natural or naturally behaving habitats. We've got woodland recovery going on. So Duncoilich bought this deer farm. It was on a large enough scale to start to talk about deer management as a population, especially roe deer. It was about just over 1,000 acres, so about 300 hectares or so. And on that area, you could begin to predict that through the whole process of recovery, there would be some deer on the site. The board, when they bought Duncoilich, Highland Pasture Community Land Trust board, thought that with it being an ex-deer farm, it would be secure, and therefore we basically walk away from deer management. We've got a fence all around it. The farm deer had been removed, and therefore the trees would grow, and we'd dig some holes and plant some trees, and everything would be rather marvelous. But actually, very rapidly, as a deer manager, the first thing I did was walk around the fences, and I realised that you can't presume anything. This gate that's wide open, the upper part, the sort of higher part, is the open range with about 15 deer per 100 hectares, red deer per 100 hectares. The inner part towards the camera is the deer farm where we were trying to grow trees, and the gate there has been blown over probably by the wind, and the deer are trampling through the gap quite happily, in and out, eating young trees. So one of the key things is to get fencing sorted out. There were a lot of discussions about methodology on how to build a fence and how to repair a fence that was in existence already, and we also recognised very early that this is a very good way of getting community involved. So we had a large number of open days where people were invited to come along and help to build a better fence to try and protect the trees on the inside from the larger number of deer on the outside. They were great. They were really enjoyed by most people. Whether or not the method we were using here is still under some debate. Putting extra netting onto an already fragile fence can sometimes make it even more fragile and more prone to. It's hard to think about it these days because you don't get much, but when Duncoilich started, there was quite a lot of snow damage on this particular fence, and putting more netting on a fragile fence just increases the amount of snow damage. So it was a great way of engaging with the community. However, we also had in Duncoilich a really neat project going on where the local school, Brynalbyn Academy in Aberfeldy, had started having a gamekeeping module, and most of the parents in Aberfeldy who had kids who were interested in that sort of thing were rather concerned that it should be a lot more than just gamekeeping. So it became a rural skills management, rural skills module for schools, And then later on, it was school leavers who got involved in the Rural Skills Project. And all of them were introduced to, all of the rural skills candidates were introduced to everything we could think of. So getting wet on a bad day was quite common, but normally it was things like planting trees, how to grow trees in the first place, how to measure deer numbers and what, or deer impact and what that meant. And part of my role as the contract stalker was to introduce them to the nuts and bolts end of deer management, you know, how to actually find a deer, decide whether to shoot it or not, shoot it and then recover the carcass, and then what to do with the carcass afterwards. We'll hear more, I'm sure, but when I moved from Perthshire to Argyll, I got very involved with Arcade Community Forest as well. And in Arcade, one of the things we were very keen to do was to encourage community stalking, which I can touch on if necessary at the end. Getting community stalking going has proven to be exciting but problematic. Just getting all the paperwork in place has been a bit difficult, and then getting people to consistently perform has been difficult as well. But in Duncoyle, one of the things we did was we started in Arcade Community Forest a community venison, a community deer larder where we were butchering deer for community consumption, for sale to the community. And with these young lads, part of the, or young people, there were girls and boys and men and women, and these people, part of what I was trying to describe to them was the very, you know, they're going from the first thing. There is a deer that needs to be culled. You go out and you cull it, all the process of that itself, but also that you're then producing a really high quality byproduct of woodland management. You know, it's rather fantastic that at the end of all that hard work, you can end up with a really healthy, good quality meat. But I hope we'll hear more about that from Jim when he talks about Knoydart. Community stalking as well, not community stalking in this case, this is another Duncoyle rural skills student who hadn't, well, I'll say he hadn't, I'm not really terribly sure of this individual, but there were individuals who came along who had never really even seen a deer before. And after some conversation about deer management and the process and that sort of thing, pretty much all of them wanted to come out and get involved. And although it's not a huge deer, it's hilly, rough sort of ground, and this lad had very kindly carried that deer all the way down to the car park where we could do the subsequent processing for venison. He'd know, well, as I say, most of them had no experience of deer stalking, no experience of seeing a deer, let alone handling them. So again, in my rather biased opinion, it was a really good opportunity to get people involved and out on the hill. I have, as I say, I have been involved in community stalking. It's something I do believe in, but on Duncoyle, it didn't really work out. When we got community people involved, as the stalkers, some would arrive with quite a lot of baggage already. They wouldn't really understand the objectives of the trust. So maybe there was a little bit more work that should have been done on communication, but we had people who were moaning about not enough deer, people who or so they didn't come again, or we would have another person who would have a lovely day out on the hill and come back and say that he hadn't found a cullable deer because they were all too good, the quality was too good. So perhaps with that, in those early days with community stalking, we needed to do much more introduction to people about what our objectives might have been and what we expected from the stalkers. But I should probably talk about that another time. Okay, that's about it. Duncoyle.
Thanks very much, Rob. That was really informative, and I'm sure you've prompted some questions in people's minds about some things that they could ask you with regards to, particularly around about that community stalking. So please do add any questions into the chat for after. Thank you, Rob. Jim, if you want to take control of the slide deck now, and we'll invite you in, please. Thank you.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Hi, welcome to my kitchen in Ayr on the western tip of the Knoydart Peninsula. I've lived and worked here on the estate for 28 years and been a steep learning curve from arriving as a student through gillying, stalking, latterly head stalker, and yeah, still learning every day. The yeah, the Knoydart residents inherited the custody of a rundown, sort of neglected estate back in 1999. The assets were mostly in poor condition and a fragile community of about 60 residents. There'd been very little stability for folk living on the estate and no true residents. It had been used as primarily a sporting estate latterly, and at the time there was a massive overpopulation of red deer with high winter mortalities. Woodlands were all fairly heavily impacted by deer. The first slide, there's some of the stags living in amongst the Inverie woods quite happily. Yeah, the community ownership brought mixed objectives to try and recover a sustainable community and invest in infrastructure. It's got quite a complicated organisational structure for such a small community. The Knoydart Foundation own the land and carry out deer management as well as social housing and various other activities. There's a trading company which runs business side of things, such as the local shop, post office, bunkhouse, and Knoydart Renewables, which runs the hydroelectric scheme, distributing electricity to the Inverie Bay area, independent from the national grid. The Knoydart Forest Trust had been set up at around the same time, with uncertainty of the land ownership, to try and manage the woodlands regardless. And that fitted quite well with the foundation for them to take on management of the community-owned woodlands. So the foundation could concentrate on the other aspects. So yeah, they manage woodland on privately owned land as well as the foundation land. Both organisations are controlled by volunteer boards of directors. That's quite a big responsibility for folk to take on if they're perhaps not involved or knowledgeable about aspects of what these bodies are doing. And from such a small population, a high recurrence of directors having to serve regularly. Its population's now over 120, stable, and opportunities for young people to return and live on the peninsula. Other community organisations have developed now, including the hall's been refurbished, the old Forge pubs recently into community ownership and refurbished. There's a maintenance company, community garden, farm, and recently a tree nursery as well, which is fantastic, growing a local seed source to be planted out. So yeah, pretty success story overall for the community. Here's a map just showing the arrangement of ownerships on the peninsula. You can see the foundation land centrally located, with other private smaller ownerships to the north and west. The Kilhone estate to the east, and then yes, kind of off the edge of the map there's Barrisdale and Camassori estates. So those three eastern estates privately owned and part of the West Knoydart Deer Management Group, which functions really well as a group. Some open progressive ideas. Yeah, a large part of my work with the team is the open range deer management. We take a annual cull ranging sort of in averaging maybe about 60 stags, 60 to 80 hinds plus calves, and then yeah, the woodland deer management on top of that. Yeah, we're focusing the cull on managing impacts on the open range habitats as well as providing community benefit. Yeah, it's a high cost operation because it's very remote and the challenges of access. See, we've got ponies to extract carcasses from a lot of the ground. And yeah, you generally need a stalker and ghillie up the hill as well to handle getting the carcass down to the ponies. So yeah, high manpower costs. It's largely been funded by taking clients out stalking out of necessity, really, because no other funding streams available. So yeah, we maximise that through the stag season and take some out through the hind season as well. Yeah, over the years we've reduced the deer densities to a level where there's very low natural mortality now and good herd health. Takes about a cull of 1/6 of the population to maintain. We've implemented HIA and mapped the NVC habitats across the ownership. We try and provide community opportunities to come out stalking, occasionally get folk out, and we tend to get 1 or 2 volunteers working with us through the season as well. Yeah, this shows how we've developed the protection of the woodland over the years in conjunction with neighbouring ownerships as well. Sort of at the north, there's Invergusran sheep farm, the west Era common grazings, the smaller ownerships around the west coast. Yeah, the priority really with protecting woodland was always to look after the remnant native woodlands initially. So yeah, the fencing concentrated on protecting those bits and allowing regeneration to start happening, augmented with planting where necessary. Obviously a lot of the ground's got no seed source on it, so planting is necessary for the funding through, over the years, Woodland Grant Scheme, SRDP, and now Forestry Grant Scheme, which we've used to yeah, achieve what we can really with the limited community resources and funding. So within those fenced areas, it's pretty much zero tolerance on deer management to get the trees away as quickly as possible, given the limited lifespan of fences. The Knoydart Forest Trust pay the Knoydart Foundation staff time when we're culling in the woodland areas, and the foundation retain the carcasses to cover the rest of the costs, overheads. So yeah, that's worked over the years. Yeah, initial maintenance payments from establishment can be used to get the trees away, and then later on, once the schemes are out of contract, we can switch over to sustainable management of forest stream to allow some income to cover the deer management costs. Yeah, looking at some of the areas of woodlands we look after, Inverie Woods here, which is what you see as you come in on the ferry from Malig. When we took over management, the fences were in poor condition, lots of deer inside the woods, very little regeneration happening. So initial, as Rob was talking about, move was to maintain the fences, and then fairly heavy culling on the red deer to allow restructuring. So a lot of the forest there is commercial plantation, and it's very yeah, marginal economically to harvest and export that and restock. So we took a decision to try and restructure over phases. and that's been working really well. So yeah, when we're replanting, we're looking at much more mixed woodland, planting quality timber species on better ground where it's more accessible for future timber that'll be useful within the community. And at the same time looking after some of the most important bits of semi-natural ancient woodland, which are now regenerating well. Yeah, the work that we've done, however, has meant that the roe deer population, which had been suppressed by the reds, have taken off with the much richer habitat and mixed stage woodland growth. So they're a real challenge to manage now and keep numbers down to a level where the restocked seedlings can get away. A lot of the natural regen just romps away regardless. Of course, it's the quality timber species that they'll target. So yeah, we do need to keep on top of that, and latterly seeker deer moving in as well, as mentioned again earlier, quite a challenge. And yeah, we do use night shooting to allow us to manage the deer there effectively. And further out the glen, we've got the Gushran and Follock plantations, which are 1970s commercial planting. I don't think they were specifically put in to be ever a commercial prospect, more as deer habitat really, to shelter the red deer herd as a sporting asset, which they've proved quite successful at. And actually, they've helped us take the pressure off the neighbouring open habitats a fair bit. But yeah, we do need to come up with a plan to either harvest and replace with native or restructure somehow, because the lodgepole and Sitka are starting to seed out into the native woodlands and outcompete the planting and regeneration. So that's going to be a consideration. And then yeah, the other individual fenced regen and re-establishment plots, similar photo here to Rob was showing, with the lush growth on the inside and fairly impacted habitats on the outside, but still with lots of seedlings in amongst the remnant trees there and potential to recover. So we've yeah, been quite successful in getting these blocks away through the community management and yeah, also the neighbours. But the oldest fences are now coming to the end of their life, and in these really remote areas that's just not viable to keep maintaining them. So we're getting to the stage where the deer are getting back into some of these fences, and we're going to have to manage the impacts going forwards to try and not lose all the benefit that's been gained from the sort of 25-30 years of recovery. Yeah, latterly we've sort of stepped up management to sort of another level really with the Black Hills Regeneration Project. We just saw the opportunity really with this string of fence blocks in the glen and not much of a gap in between them. So we went through a long community consultation process to see what initially the landowners in that area thought, and then the wider community. We had several presentations and evening sessions in the hall and discussions, and yeah, there was just overwhelming community support to go ahead with this really. So the next stage was how are we going to fund it, and it was just at the time that the Nature Restoration Fund was coming into its own, and after a bit of backwards and forwards we were successful in an application, and about 250,000 from the fund over 2 years paid for the new link fences and a compensatory deer cull, which took about an additional 200 deer on top of our annual cull over those 2 years. The area was primarily a wintering stag ground, so that's one of the things that made it possible, in that the 2 new link fences have deer leaps in them, and that allowed the deer to leave the area over the leaps but not come back in. So yeah, that was quite successful, and backed up with culling in that area plus the neighbouring area to try and keep the density of deer outside that fence at the same level it was, and not see any increased herbivore impacts. It's facilitated native woodland planting within that area that's now unconstrained by deer fencing. So the Forest Trust is taking that on over phases as per the map here. There's some natural regeneration areas at the south in red, and then the sort of middle red area is already planted now, plus the yellow area at the north on the area of common grazings. And they're just looking at moving on to the orange coloured area for planting this coming winter. Yeah, here's a photo of the area that was shown in red. This is the road out to Era where I am, and yeah, just you can visualize the more mosaic of landscape habitats that can be developed without the need for these restrictive fences. So sort of on the face on the right hand side, you might be able to make out the mounding, where we've gone on with that more traditional approach to establish woodland as quickly as we can where there isn't much in the way of seed source. And then up around the crags, there's remnant trees that are regenerating and spreading out. And then lower down, the blanket bog areas, which are left unplanted, and we're now going into a first phase of peatland restoration project as well. So that's quite exciting. Yes, off the back of the success of the Black Hills project and sort of growing community confidence in land management, and also more awareness of the climate change and biodiversity crisis, we applied to the Ferns Fund, the Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland, a bit of a mouthful. We managed to get funding for a project which was finally funded actually through the National Lottery Heritage Fund 100%, rather than they'd normally be 50-50 with Nature Scot. That's actually given us more flexibility with the project, and we've been able to kind of go off on tangents a bit. The initial idea was to develop a place-based nature credit, looking at capitalising on the carbon credit developments and natural capital market, which we were all pretty bamboozled with, to be honest, and still are a lot. But it quickly became obvious that the step before, we actually needed to try and decide what we wanted to do with the land as a whole, before we started thinking more about how we were actually going to pay for it. So we've gone through a lot of community consultation again, events in the hall, visiting speakers, developing the land management vision that you can see on the screen. So it's kind of a three-legged stool really, with carbon, biodiversity and the community all being seen as equally important parts of the puzzle really. You know, without the one, the other two fall down, and so that's the picture that we all drew eventually. From there we developed a draft land management plan, which is just in the final stages of consultation now, and the project as a whole funded is coming to an end the end of this month. But we're then looking to apply for funding again, hopefully from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, to implement the land management plan sort of shortfalls that are predicted, plus continuing the Knoydart credit investigations to hopefully develop a sustainable funding model going forwards. We're very aware of the national push towards reduced deer densities and increased woodland and lower impacts on other habitats. So that's going to reduce our ability to rely on sport shooting going forwards, as the deer reduction could potentially take the level down for a period to a point where it's quite a low harvest, as it were, of carcasses, until the woodland and habitats potentially recover to a level where the deer are then able to recover in density. And that's the kind of next step really through the first years of the management plan, is to work out exactly how far we want to go with that wider reduction, working with neighbours. We've got the John Muir Trust to the north, who are already working to that kind of plan, looking to have full ecological recovery. And further up Loch Hourn, there's Barrisdale Estate, which has the Pinewood Triple SI, which is still in not recovering. So they're looking at ways to fence or potentially landscape scale deer management to bring the Triple SI back into a favourable condition. So yeah, lots more conversations to be had there going forward. As part of the project, we've also carried out this wild trees survey.
5 minutes, Jim.
Okie dokie. This is in partnership with Trees for Life, who developed this methodology. To start with, the map you can see there is taken from where trees were recorded on the first Ordnance Survey map, and then they've developed a survey based on that, with plots to look at remnant trees, remnant seedlings, and also refugial plant species they're described as, so plants which would indicate where a woodland previously was and where there might be potential for those species to spread out again into the wider landscape. On the foundation grounds, we also looked at the whole land area to baseline the sort of natural capital potential, and that's where this herbivore impact map has come from. This is calibrated to woodland, so yeah, outside of the Black Hills and the other fences, impacts still showing much higher than would allow woodland to regenerate. But yeah, if you compare that to the dwarf shrub heath and blanket bog monitoring, they're showing much lower impacts. So that's what we've been managing the open range cull to up till this point. So yeah, just if you are thinking about monitoring, then you need to think carefully about what you're monitoring for and how you're going to use those results. Yeah, just wrapping up here really, the wooded face in the background on the left is the fence line that was shown earlier, and the deer are getting back into there now. But in the foreground, we've got remnant trees outside of deer fences, and on the right hand side you can see quite thick regen now starting to come up. Primarily birch, rowan and eared willow. So yeah, the open range deer management is almost on the cusp of allowing some regen to start getting away. Yeah, just quickly to finish off, thinking about the future challenges and adapting to what's coming. I'll not say much about the Land Reform Bill and Natural Environment Bill. It's all quite complicated stuff. But yeah, just to bear in mind that there are going to be these new requirements coming forward. In particular, the new Code of Practice on Deer Management is specifically going to be updated, and a lot of the sort of pressure will come from complying with that. But yeah, incentives also coming, and hopefully going to make deer management for community woodlands more sustainable. We've used the FGS Deer Impact Reduction Fund to fund the ongoing deer management in the Black Hills area. And yeah, we're hoping that the new Nature Scot incentives for deer reductions will be expanded and trialled further afield. So yeah, all these measures have the potential to support community partnership projects, and also I think a lot of the NGOs are also talking about targeting funds towards deer management as well as planting trees. And yeah, the natural capital financing and use of carbon credits, it's still in the early days, but it could prove lucrative for communities, and potentially, if the markets are confirmed to be there and start operating, it might give the opportunities for more communities to buy land at scale, being able to, as well as receive funds and donations to purchase, potentially speculate on the natural capital value of that land, to give the confidence to take out loans on the potential income from that stream in the future. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to share our learnings that we've struggled to come to over the last couple of years on that subject in the future. And yeah, I'll just leave you with a nice slide of a bit of semi-natural ancient woodland at Scottus.
Rob, thank you very much. Sorry, Jim, thank you very much for that presentation. It just strikes me how much of a fine balance it all is in between becoming victims of your success and also that financial balance of actually stalking for venison and income that comes with that as well. So really, really interesting insight into how you do things at Knoydart. So thank you very much. So folks, we've got 15 minutes left, and it's just an opportunity now for you to ask any questions. So I've had a couple of questions in the chat, which is great, and thank you so much to the people who have commented with some responses and some suggestions and ideas. That's one thing that I really love about running these webinars, is that everyone kind of piggybacks on each other and offers options and suggestions for resources and support. So much appreciated to those of you who have asked these questions. Stephen asked one just after Jenny's first presentation, and it was directly to you, Jenny. Louise Farmer has come back with some suggestions, but I'm wondering, Jenny, Stephen's saying they have 100-hectare woodland which is heavily browsed by deer, but there is a significant footfall by the public up there. He's on the NC 500, it's also a SSSI site. And there's a campsite nearby, so safety is a big concern with regards to stalking. What do you think would be good options for them? What advice would you give them?
Okay, there's probably two things. The first is it is possible. So I live in the borders. I live near Glen Tress, which is a big FLS wood. Loads of people, loads of crazy people that go out cycling at night, 5 in the morning, there's people about. And the FLS stalkers, I mean, they still manage to stalk there and manage the deer. So it's possible to manage deer when there's a lot of people about. Obviously it's very specialized, and these guys have the kind of support of FLS behind them. So where you are, I don't know whether it would just be a local person doing it and they might feel uncomfortable. So if you can find someone who would feel comfortable doing it, it's kind of up to them as an individual. Then they'd be the professional, they would know. But I would also say that if you couldn't get the deer managed, then there's you know, it's worth thinking about. I think you said 100 hectares. Do you know, you don't have to like view your wood as a whole. Do you know, you can have sort of, you could look at sort of 5 hectares and think, right, we're going to sort of focus on that for the next 3 years. So when I talked earlier about the bit of land that I've got, I mean, I literally just got a kind of steel wire and wrapped it around existing trees where the regen was in the middle, and just kind of wrapped it up to about 2 meters. And that's worked, and that there's red deer there, and that's kept the red deer out. And it doesn't look very pretty, but it works. So don't just think about it, oh, well, we've got 100 hectares, we need to manage this as a whole the same all the time. You know, you can, I mean, you're next to a campsite, that's probably a bit wacky to think that you could get people to camp in it and stuff. I don't know, but you know, just I think you can be innovative and think about different areas in the wood and also changes over time. One thing I did want to talk about was scaring, but I decided I was scared off talking about scaring. But I mean, as soon as you sort of mentioned scaring, everyone says, oh, it doesn't work. The deer just get habituated against it. But I think it has its place.
Jenny, that's scaring off deer, not people.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, the deer, not the people. But I think it's worth investigating, especially for small areas. You know, if you can kind of change it from like making a noise to squirting water to a smell or something. Do you know? I think you could be innovative and not just think of the wood as one entity that needs to be managed all the same across the whole thing every year. Yeah, I hope that helps. But yeah, get a professional if you can, and get their advice.
Perfect, thank you. And can I just piggyback onto the back of that as well, because you started off your presentation with talking about getting people to know the deer. And yes. For me, that whole Bambi ideology sounds lovely, but then I would think surely you're going to come up against some community resistance to culling if you are encouraging people to get to know the deer families that are in your woodland. So how do you balance and manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's tricky. I mean, if you know the community woodland I was talking about that has their own Facebook page for the deer, I mean, there's no way that they could start culling those because the people absolutely love them. But I think if you're starting that conversation about deer and you're just getting people more connected with the deer, then part of that is then explaining the damage that they do and the need to control them. You know, it's all part of the same conversation. So it might be upsetting, but it's just part of what needs to be done. And I think that can be explained quite well. I mean, a few weeks ago, I helped organise a deer butchery demonstration at a local festival we have here. And it's the first time we've done it. I thought, oh my goodness, this could go any which way. And it was really popular, and it bizarrely really popular with families. You know, there was kids there. There was one little girl started crying when the guy cut the deer's head off, but that was it. And everyone else was really engaged with it. And so I think you would probably be surprised. I mean, who knows who you get in your community? You don't know, you might be against some people, but I think it's worth a try, and I think it's a good way of bringing people into the conversation.
Thanks, Jenny. Stephen, do you want to come in?
Really just a very basic question, because I know absolutely nothing about deer management. I've no precious little about forest management, to be honest. But who do you need to get permission off to do this? I don't imagine you just grab your Lee Enfield and put your wellies on and head for the hills. Who needs to be told, and what bits of paper do you need?
Good question. Who'd like to answer?
Well, I could start, and then then you guys can butt in. I mean, ultimately, it's the landowner. So you need the landowner's permission to be able to, you know, deer aren't owned by anyone, but the land, I can't remember the term, but the landowner has the right to kill the deer on his or her land. So you need the landowner's permission. And that's essentially it, as far as I know. I mean, I think you need to submit cull returns to Nature Scott. And I'm missing something drastic here, but I've Rob, Jim, what do you think? But I think that's it. I think it's pretty much the landowner, and obviously you need your insurance. You know, if you've got a rifle, you need your licenses and you need your insurances and things like that. But essentially, it's just the landowner, I think. And then you tell Nature Scott how many you've killed.
Rob, do you want to
just to,
yeah.
Sorry, Sharon, just to clarify, I mean, our woodland is community owned, so it's effectively the board of directors give it the go ahead.
I think so, yeah. If it's community owned, yeah. The directors are the ones that are speaking on behalf of the community.
So there's legislation which is the occupier of the land or the owner has the right to cull deer and to tell others whether they can do it or not. And then there's really important guidance as well. So as a responsible landowner, you'd want to have some evidence that your people doing the deer culling are competent. And there are deer management qualifications. There's a simple one, level 1. It's not actually that simple, but level 1 is okay. It's pretty basic. And then the next one, level 2, means that you are qualified as a competent, a safe stalker. And very often insurance will, in certain locations anyway, especially the community-owned areas, the level 2 qualification might be needed by insurance. So there's legislation and then just really sensible guidance on who can do what where.
That's really helpful. And actually, Chris has come into the chat as well and spoken about DSC and Basque with regards to organisations that provide that training as well. So if you have a look at the chat, Stephen, you'll see more information there. That kind of segues nicely into another question that we had from Louise, who asked about, she was keen to get maybe, Louise is up at Strathern at Tomatin, and they're looking to get some community stalking started. So she was interested in the key admin and any templates. And actually, I would be interested if anybody's got any templates to forward them to me, and we can put them on our website as save people having to seek them out themselves. So who would like to support in answering that question about what's needed, how do you get started, tips and tricks, and what admin is involved?
Okay, I'll say a few words.
Go for it,
Community stalking means a lot of different things. In my opinion, one of the most important things is it gets that conversation going at a very early stage, so people understand the whole process of deer management. Jenny already touched on that with some of the concerns there are in many established deer forum. But so the community stalking process involves just getting people involved in the conversation and hopefully some of the practical work. From an administration point of view, I've only got experience of one forest, Arcade Community Forest, where we have a community stalking team. And the idea is that certified people who pass their DSC, their deer management qualification that I spoke about, we will have a team of people who are fully certified who can take out other stalkers. They can either do the stalking themselves or take another stalker out. I'm a little hesitant in going on about the admin too much because it's actually the admin which is holding the whole thing up. We have a team of 4 level 2 stalkers. We have an interested group of level 1 and below stalkers who want to increase their experience, and we have a very engaged community who understand the need for venison for deer stalking and as part of the management, but actually getting all the things to meet within a year, which is, unfortunately these things are time bound because you arrange insurance and then you get all the people together, and just when they all agree it's time to go out stalking, the insurance has run out. So actually the admin needs a, not full-time by any means, but a definite person who's going to take on the responsibility for arranging who goes out on what days, making sure that they have proper certification and cover, who's liaising with people who are going to be interested in being accompanied or accompanying a stalk. Quite a lot of people, surprisingly, want to just come along and see how it goes. They're not actually interested in the stalking themselves. They're just interested in the process. But all of those people need an administrative input. And it's no criticism of the community forest at Arcade, but because they now have staff who can probably do this organisation quite well. But it has just been, previously, it's been a hurdle to getting the thing running effectively. The conversation side's gone really well. They're actually getting people out into the forest has been more difficult.
Yeah, things seem to take forever to do, don't they? And as you say, you run out of time and insurance runs out and all the rest of it. So that's
there isn't really a template yet. We're still
right, okay.
sort of in the, I think community stalking involves different. There are many facets to it, many reasons why people might get involved. Some want to have recreational stalking, some want to get involved in woodland management through deer. So again, it's a matter of getting clear objectives, but making sure that you've got somebody who's willing to take on the not onerous but fairly detailed process of managing it all.
Yeah, which is a challenge for some community woodlands that are managed by a group of trustees rather than being any staff involved in that process as well, which
absolutely
seems to be a common thing. Folks, we've run out of time, but thank you very much for those questions. Thanks for answering. Thank you very much to everybody who has attended today. I certainly, as a layperson, find this fascinating. I'm hoping that you have also taken away some information that is useful to you today. This session has been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. Because we have Louise, don't apologise for the information dump, all super helpful, and I will actually send out all the links to you all that have been put in the chat just so that you all have them once I also have the link for the recording. So it'll be next week before I get to that, but that will go up on, in fact it'll be the week after because Jen's on leave. So next fortnight I will be back in touch. Please, if you could scan the QR code and just give us some feedback, please. Because we are funded, we need to then share the feedback about the processes and our outputs and everything. So we need our viewers and our members to be able to provide that feedback for us. So thank you once again for doing that. Folks, it's dark outside now, it's time to go, but thank you so much for attending today. Thank you very much to our presenters for their marvellous work and sharing their knowledge and insights. And should you need any other information, please do just email me back at sharon@communitywoods.org and I will do my best to point you in the right direction. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Thank you.